rapid advancement in technology, it is critically important to ascertain the efficient cost providing telecommunication services. This is in turn will help the regulator in monitor and regulate the prices and the operators to work out a suitable price. Having this objective in mind, we have invited reputed international expert to explain cost modeling so that operator and our Trcsl staff can learn from ensuing instruction and discussion to utilize the coaching and ideas gathered to develop an acceptable cost model for voice and data services. I look forward for successful workshop which will as whole be beneficial to the industry, and I will take this opportunity to wish Mr. Jim Holmes and Mr. Shami Sharma a pleasant and memorable stay in our beautiful country, Sri Lanka. Thank you.
ICT sector has transformed, converged and evolved over the last several years, and it will continue to do so in next 5 to 10 years. Especially if you see here that mobile has reached a complete ubiquity, means the whole world has actually been covered by around 7 billion mobile subscriptions. So everybody on the earth is under the coverage of mobile phones. And at the same time, we see for the mobile broadband is one of the fastest technology, and 50% of the world population is covered with the 3G phones, with the 3G coverage by the end of 2013. From this graph, there are different mechanisms different countries adopt for regulating the wholesale services. Either price ceilings are set by the regulators, or the cost orientation, benchmarking, retail minus, and the rate of return, and the price caps. There are different models that are available, and different countries follow differently. Let's look at what we are doing in Asia Pacific region. Here, this is again the data that we collect from you, from all countries, and we try to share so that you can see the best practices. And one of the predominant way here in Asia Pacific for regulating tariffs are benchmarking and the cost orientation. And initially, I remember in 2008, when Trcsl invited ITU to come up with a benchmarking exercise. Now, more than 6 or 7 years are passed. Now there's a need for the industry to see how we can introduce cost base. You see here cost orientation, which covers the cost base. So we are developing the models for the cost-based pricing, and Sri Lanka would be one of the beneficiary along with your cooperation, because without the industry and the accuracy of the data, we won't be able to come up with the cost models that can be used for the wholesale price regulation. I'll spend just maybe a couple of minutes for this important slide in terms of what you can look forward to the future regulations. There have been different stages of regulation. The first stage of regulation we call that, which is highly regulated monopolies. The incumbent operators were there, different sets of regulations were required by them. Then the second generation of regulation, limited by managed competition. Maybe we introduced another operator, so which continued for some time. And the third generation of regulation addressed the protection of competition and the consumers. Now with the tremendous growth of IP traffic and the broadband services, we have seen a fourth generation of regulation, which actually differs from the previous generations of regulations, and the emphasis that they place on the pursuit of the government social and economic policy goals, as well as on the need for the improved consumer protection and the access for the network and the broadband markets. So this is cross-sectoral beyond convergence. We are not looking convergence in terms of the ICT and the telecom and the IT services, because the work that ICT industry is doing is important for health, for education, for agriculture, for tourism. So this requires a completely different model of fourth generation of regulation. I'm happy to share with you that on the right, on the top left, you see this report, ITU, the Trends in Telecom Reforms on this topic has been released by ITU first time, and which is free for access to anyone. So you might like to go through in details the way in which the fourth generation of the regulation would look like. So with that, finally, I would like to say that for Sri Lanka, particularly when we are looking about the Smartly Digital Asia Pacific 2020, that is our goal and vision in the Leaders Summit that was held last year in Bangkok, which is in alignment with the Smart Sri Lanka that we have the vision here, especially taking into account the needs for the other industries where you can generate revenue. And you see opportunity not only in the telecom industry, in the health, the non-communicable diseases, and also for the e-governance, transparency and the good governance. You can provide those services to the government, and the education and smart water management, and of course smart grids. So these are great opportunity, and recently with the big data you have also great opportunity to see how you can harness the potential of ICT and using the cost base and the retail tariffs to address the needs of the consumers in Sri Lanka to see smartly digital Sri Lanka. With that, I wish every success to all of you, and once again I would like to thank Trcsl and all of you and Jim Holmes to have a very productive and fruitful workshop here in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for your attention.
I can be quite succinct in saying that the objective of the workshop is for everybody here to share their knowledge and their wisdom in the course of going through what cost models can do for all of us, and also what they can't do. I mean, there are limitations to the sorts of issues that cost models can resolve by themselves. They can always assist in some way with many issues, but there are limitations. A further objective is to look at the future of cost modelling, where it might go in a converged industry. The reason we're spending a lot of time in the last 10 years on cost modelling is because of the complexities of the platforms in telecommunications, where multiple platforms support even more services. So in order to determine the cost of a service, you really have to develop quite complex allocation devices for allocating network costs, right? I mean, we don't have that problem if there was one product and one network, because everything would be a direct cost. So it would be a matter of arguing the details of the cost, not how they're allocated. So one of the things we'll be doing quite a bit during the week is to look at the allocation of costs. And there are some judgments. There are some judgments to be made. And many of them are accounting judgments, but they're to be made by managers, not just by accountants. Okay, so we all have to make them. So that's what we'll be doing, that's the objective. And at the end of the week, apart from being relieved that you've survived, I think I'd like you to be able to say, look, I feel comfortable in talking about cost models. I feel comfortable about testing arguments that people put to me about cost models. I feel comfortable about opening up a cost model on my laptop. I feel confident I know where to go to find out the results, and I feel confident to know how the results can be modified by different assumptions. In other words, it's not a blank, it's not something to be avoided, that you feel comfortable in working with cost models. This is a put up your hands. It's not a hold up. Put up your hands if you deal with Microsoft Excel. Well, let's start again. Put up your hands if before I spoke you've actually heard of Microsoft Excel. Are all hands? You've all got mirrorly hands. You can't straighten your arm. Okay. Put up your hand if you have actually used Microsoft Excel. You're all spin bowlers. Okay. Right. Put up your hands if you've seen a cost model, a network cost model. Fewer. Okay. Put up your hands if you've run a network cost model. By the way, what do you mean by run? By run, all it means is you put data in and have a look at the answer. That's what running a model is. It's putting data into it or changing data that's there and then having a look at the answer. So in the light of that, who's run a network cost model? Okay. The groups are not even in this respect. You notice that? We tried to even out the 7 groups. Okay, and the last one, who was actually created, developed, or substantially modified a network cost model? Right. At the end of the week, all hands will be up. It'll be a complete hold-up. Okay? Thank you for that, because it gives me an idea of obviously different people are at different states. Now, I did promise this would be quick, but there is two last things I want to say. Firstly, why are you in the groups you're in, as opposed to sitting next to your colleague or your boss or something like that? Well, the reason is we wanted to share out the sources of wisdom, where you come from, right? So we didn't want everybody from the TRC, for example, to be clustered on a couple of groups. But if you do, can you put it on the board? Group number 1, we are the all-stars or whatever you are. I can say that in my recent experience in Oman, the group of ladies called themselves the Fabulous Ladies, and unfortunately they were, but unfortunately for the rest of us. Okay, so what I'm going to do is probably walk around a bit. I won't be using the stand, but all of my stuff is here, and of course we've got a whole lot of slideshows which I'll speak to and which you've got copies of. Now, the important thing is for you to interrupt, ask anything, or make any comment anytime you like. That's the whole point. It's all informal. If I'm about to get on to the subject, I'll put it off. But otherwise, we'll try to deal with issues as they arise. Okay? So if you do wish to have a question, or make a comment, I really wanted everybody to hear what you've got to say. So there was going to be a roving microphone. Thirdly, we want to look at the types of costs. As any accountant will lovingly tell you, there are multiple classifications of costs. Costs are a many splendid thing. There are just so many of them. And then we want to have a look at cost standards. There are different standards or accounting standards relating to costs, and they all have their place in telecoms regulation, but it's a different place, and we need to know when we use one standard versus another. And that's the last point. Then the fixed costs are being spread over more units of output, and so your unit costs decline. They don't decline in a nice straight line, they decline in a curve. But for our purposes, it's easy to work with straight lines. What is the profit here? With volume 1, now, well, what is profit? I've got a formula here. The profit, this is the gross amount of profit, is the total price or revenue minus the costs for an individual times the volume. Everybody here has done all of that before? I mean, is that new? Put up your hand if any of this is brand spanking new. Good.